It started with a lie wrapped in ambition, a six-figure performance bonus my wife, Sarah, supposedly earned. I was her biggest cheerleader, the loyal husband holding down the fort while she conquered the corporate world. But the truth was a far more carnal transaction. The late nights at the office, the hushed phone calls, the scent of a cologne that wasn't mine clinging to her clothes, they weren't signs of success but symptoms of betrayal. When I finally found the evidence, it wasn't just a crack in our marriage. It was a seismic event that leveled everything I thought was real. I could have screamed, I could have shattered things, but a cold, quiet calm washed over me instead. A plan began to form, one built not on rage, but on the very details she thought I was too oblivious to notice. You think you know how this ends, a bitter divorce, a broken man, think again. What I uncovered next and what I did with that knowledge changed everything. Before diving in, hit that subscribe button and comment below. Have you ever dealt with betrayal? Let's hear your stories. Part 1, the bonus that broke the bank. The lie, like all the best ones, was anchored in a believable truth. Sarah was a shark. In the cutthroat world of corporate tech sales, she was the apex predator, and I had a front row seat to her ascent for 2 decades. I was proud of her. Hell, I'd orchestrated my own life to facilitate hers. My architecture firm, once my burning passion, had been downsized to a one-man operation run from a converted garage office. It was a conscious choice we'd made when our son, Leo, was young. I'd be the stable, present parent, the one who could make it to every soccer game and parent-teacher conference while she climbed the ladder. It was a sacrifice, sure, but one I made willingly for our family, for her. So when she came home that Tuesday night, fizzing with an energy that seemed to crackle in the air, I was ready to celebrate. She tossed her designer handbag on the kitchen island, a sleek leather missile, and pulled out a bottle of Veuve Clicquot from her briefcase. That should have been the first red flag. We were a nice bottle of Sauvignon Blanc couple, not a top-shelf champagne on a weeknight couple. "Mark, you're not going to believe this," she said, her voice a little too high, a little too bright. She practically danced around the kitchen, her movements sharp and jerky with adrenaline. "Julian just gave me the news. I landed the Axiom account, the whole thing. The one you've been working on for 6 months. Sarah, that's incredible." I enveloped her in a hug, inhaling the familiar scent of her perfume mixed with the sterile air of her high-rise office building. But there was something else, too. A faint, musky undertone, a cologne. I dismissed it. "She works in an office full of men." "It gets better," she said, pulling back, her eyes gleaming. "Julian called it the single biggest deal in the division's history. He authorized a discretionary performance bonus, off-cycle." She named a number then, a number so large it felt obscene. It was more than I'd made in the last 3 years combined. A life-altering sum of money that could pay off the rest of our mortgage, fund Leo's entire college education, and leave enough for the beachfront retirement home we always dreamed of. "My God, Sarah," I breathed, genuinely floored. I don't even know what to say. He must think the world of you. He knows talent when he sees it," she said, a little too quickly, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She busied herself with popping the champagne, the cork flying off with a loud thwack that made me jump. We drank, we toasted her success, the future, our life. But as the bubbles dissipated in my glass, a strange unease began to settle in my gut. Sarah was euphoric, but it felt brittle, performative. Throughout the evening, her phone, which was usually surgically attached to her hand, remained face down on the counter, silent. Whenever it buzzed, a flicker of something, annoyance, anxiety, crossed her face before she smoothed it away. The next few days were a blur of financial planning and forced celebration. Sarah announced she was treating herself to a new car, a sleek, silver Mercedes that looked more like a spaceship than a sedan. She revamped her wardrobe, swapping her tasteful business attire for clothes that were sharper, more expensive, and I couldn't help but notice, sexier. "It's a new era, Mark," she'd said when I raised an eyebrow at a particularly form-fitting dress. "I have to look the part. Julian is all about projecting success. Julian, her boss, Julian Croft." The name was a constant presence in our house, a third party in our marriage. It was "Julian thinks," and Julian said, and Julian needs me to fly to Chicago on Friday. He was handsome in that predatory, Silver Fox CEO way. I'd met him once at a sterile company Christmas party. He had a handshake that felt like a power move and eyes that seemed to scan and appraise everyone in the room, including me. He'd clapped me on the shoulder, calling me the rock behind the superstar, a compliment so condescending it felt like an insult. I'd smiled politely while imagining designing a structurally unsound building for him. The suspicion started as a low hum, a background noise I could almost ignore. It was the little things. The way she'd started password protecting her laptop, which had always been open between us. The hushed late-night calls she'd take in the master bathroom with the water running. Just a final prep with Julian for the morning meeting, she'd say, emerging with a flushed face and an evasive gaze. The bonus, the life-changing money, should have brought us closer, but it felt like it was building a wall between us, brick by expensive brick, a wall I was on the wrong side of. Part 2, Whispers on a Second Phone. The moment of discovery wasn't cinematic. There was no dramatic walk-in, no private investigator sliding a manila envelope of grainy photos across my desk. It was quiet, mundane, and all the more devastating for it. It was a Saturday morning, about 3 weeks after the bonus announcement. Sarah was supposedly at an all-day leadership off-site seminar. I was doing a deep clean of our walk-in closet, a task I'd been putting off for months. As I was sorting through a pile of her old handbags destined for goodwill, my fingers brushed against something hard and rectangular at the bottom of a tote bag she hadn't used in ages. It was a phone. A burner phone, I'd realize later, but at that moment it was just an anonymous-looking black slab, not her sleek, new iPhone. My heart started a low, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. There was no reason for her to have a second phone. None. My hands trembled as I pressed the power button. I prayed for a dead battery, for a forgotten old device that meant nothing. But the screen lit up, glowing with a generic background. No password. That was the first punch to the gut. The security on her main phone was tighter than Fort Knox, but this one was wide open. She never expected me to find it. There were only 2 apps on the home screen, a messaging app I didn't recognize and the photo gallery. I clicked on the messages first. There was only one contact listed, Jay. The conversation thread went back months. My blood ran cold as I scrolled, my world tilting on its axis. It was all there in stark, undeniable text. Jay, still glowing from last night, you're going to own this Axiom deal. Sarah, only because I had the best coach and the best motivation. Jay, I authorized the transfer. Consider it a down payment. Sarah, it's more money than I've ever seen. It feels dirty. I love it. Jay, success is dirty. That's why it's fun. He bought the story. Sarah, hook, line, and sinker. He's so proud of me. Poor Mark, poor Mark. The words vibrated in my skull. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to sit down on the floor, surrounded by my wife's shoes. I kept scrolling, my thumb moving mechanically through a timeline of our shared life, now recontextualized as a lie. There were messages planning their trysts disguised as business meetings. The late-night strategy session was a hotel room downtown. The weekend conference in Chicago was a suite at a resort. My wife wasn't just cheating on me, she was living a complete double life funded by her lover, under the guise of a career I had sacrificed my own for. The bonus wasn't a reward for her work, it was a payment, a retainer. She hadn't just claimed a bonus, she had become one. I felt a primal rage building, a hot, white fire in my chest, but then I clicked on the photo gallery, and the rage was doused by an icy flood of pure humiliation. There were dozens of photos, selfies of Sarah and Julian in hotel beds, champagne glasses in hand. Pictures of her in lingerie I'd never seen, a wicked smile on her face that was never meant for me. In one, she was wearing a diamond necklace, a piece I definitely didn't buy, and laughing, her head thrown back in ecstasy. I stood up, the phone feeling like a lead weight in my hand. I walked in a daze from the closet to our bedroom. Our bedroom, the room where we had built a life, raised a son, shared our deepest fears and quietest comforts. It was all a stage, and I was the fool playing the part of the loving, oblivious husband. I thought about smashing the phone. I thought about packing a bag and just leaving. I thought about calling her off-site and screaming until my throat was raw. But as I stood there, looking at our wedding portrait on the dresser, 2 young, hopeful people smiling at a future that had turned out to be a fiction, a different feeling began to crystallize out of the shock. It was cold, hard, and sharp as a shard of glass. Resolve, she and her benefactor had architected this elaborate deceit. They thought I was a simple man, the stable, predictable foundation upon which she could build her triumphant new life. They had miscalculated. I was an architect, after all. And I knew better than anyone that if the foundation is compromised, the entire structure will come crashing down. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to break things. I was going to wait. I was going to gather my own materials, draw up my own blueprints, and I was going to demolish their world. Part 3, A Ghost in Our Bed. The days that followed were a masterclass in psychological warfare, waged primarily against myself. I had to become a ghost in my own life, an actor playing the role I had unknowingly been cast in all along, the supportive, slightly clueless husband. Every smile was a lie. Every "how was your day, honey" was a baited hook. Every touch felt like poison. Sarah came home from her seminar that evening, flushed with the thrill of her deception. She kissed me, her lips tasting of wine and secrets. God, what a long day. All we did was trust falls and corporate speak, she sighed, draping her coat over a chair. Sounds rough, I said, my voice unnervingly steady. I was cooking dinner, chopping vegetables with a precision that bordered on surgical. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the knife on the cutting board was the only thing that kept my hands from shaking. At least you're home now. The second phone was tucked away safely, a toxic artifact hidden in my workshop. I had gone through it meticulously, using another phone to photograph every single message, every single picture, and uploaded them to a secure, encrypted cloud drive. I was documenting the rot. That night, lying in bed next to her was the purest form of torture. The space between us felt like a chasm. I could feel the heat radiating from her body, a body that had been in another man's arms just hours before. My mind replayed the images from the phone, superimposing Julian's face onto our shared space. Did he whisper the same things to her? Did she make the same sounds? The erotic flashbacks the prompt mentioned weren't just about our passion. They were now corrupted, twisted into a horror film starring my wife. I remembered a weekend getaway we'd taken for our anniversary a few months back, how passionate and alive she'd seemed. At the time, I thought we were reconnecting. Now I realized I was just a placeholder, a brief intermission in her grand affair. Was she comparing me to him even then? The thought was a physical blow. I feigned sleep, listening to the subtle change in her breathing, waiting. Sure enough, around 1 a.m., she slipped out of bed. I heard the soft click of the master bathroom door, followed by the faint sound of the shower running, a classic move. I cracked my eye open and saw the sliver of light from under the door. She wasn't showering, she was texting her lover. My internal turmoil was a raging storm. One part of me, the wounded husband, wanted to kick down the door and confront her, to see the guilt and fear on her face. Another part, a darker, more pragmatic voice, urged patience. An explosion would be satisfying for a moment, but it would cede all control to her. She would cry, she would deny, she would gaslight. She'd turn it around on me, my snooping, my paranoia, and paint herself as the victim. No. The architect in me knew that a controlled demolition requires careful planning. You don't just light a stick of dynamite, you strategically place charges at the structure's weakest points and wait for the perfect moment to press the button. I had to understand the scope of the enemy. Who was Julian Croft? I spent my nights in my garage office, supposedly working on blueprints for a client's deck renovation, but in reality, I was conducting a deep dive investigation. Google was my shovel. Social media, financial records, public filings, they were my dirt. Julian was the CEO of his division, married for 30 years to a woman named Elena, a quiet, philanthropic type who chaired hospital boards and arts committees. They had 2 grown daughters. On the surface, they were a pillar of the community, a power couple. But a little digging revealed whispers of a ruthless corporate climber, a man known for his high turnover of staff, particularly attractive female subordinates. Sarah wasn't the first, I suspected. She was just the latest project. This knowledge didn't bring comfort, only a colder, sharper anger. This wasn't a whirlwind romance, a crime of passion. This was a transaction. He was using his power and money to buy my wife's affection and ambition, and she was eagerly selling. The bonus was just the most blatant part of the payment plan. I started debating my path. Revenge or understanding? The prompt asks for this internal debate, and it was real. For a fleeting moment, I tried to see it from her side. Was she bored? Did she feel unappreciated? Had I become too comfortable, too predictable? Maybe this affair was a cry for help, a desperate attempt to feel alive. But then the images from the phone would flash in my mind, her laughing in his arms, the casual cruelty of the text message, poor Mark. There was no cry for help there, only contempt. Any flicker of empathy was extinguished by the sheer arrogance of their betrayal. They didn't just cheat, they mocked me. They built their little fantasy on the foundation of my life's work. My empathy was reserved for myself now. And for Alina Croft, Part 4, The Architecture of a Lie. My first attempt at a soft confrontation was a calculated failure. I needed to see her lie to my face to feel the texture of her deceit. I chose a quiet Sunday morning over coffee. You know, I began, swirling the dregs in my cup. I was thinking about that bonus. It's amazing, but it also feels a little out of the blue. Are you sure everything is okay at work, that there are no strings attached? I watched her face carefully. For a nanosecond, a flicker of panic. It was there and gone, replaced by a mask of weary indignation. What are you implying, Mark? She asked, her voice dangerously low. That I didn't earn it, that I slept my way to the top. After 20 years of me busting my ass, that's what you think of me. The gaslighting was immediate and potent. She was a professional. No, of course not, I said, raising my hands in mock surrender. I just worry about you. A bonus that big, off-cycle, it can put a target on your back. Corporate politics can be brutal. I was framing my concern as protection, a role she was used to me playing. It worked. She softened, but only slightly. Julian is protecting me, she said, and the way she said his name was laced with an intimacy that was like a knife in my gut. He knows my value to the company. He's my mentor, Mark, that's all. I'm sorry, but it's insulting that you would even suggest otherwise. You're supposed to be my biggest supporter. She was turning my own sacrifice back on me, weaponizing my loyalty. It was brilliant in a sociopathic sort of way. I saw the defiance in her eyes, the utter conviction that she had me completely fooled. This wasn't a woman grappling with guilt. This was a woman who felt entitled to her second life, who believed she had earned the right to have both the thrill of her affair and the comfort of her marriage. I overheard a phone call a few days later. I was in my workshop and she was in the backyard pacing. She thought I was wearing headphones, listening to music. No, he doesn't suspect a thing, she said, her voice a low murmur, a pause. Of course, he's being a little mopey. I think the money intimidates him, makes him feel less than. She laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. Don't worry about Mark, he's predictable, he'll get over it. Now tell me about the hotel in Aspen. Is it ski in, ski out? Predictable, mopey, less than. That was the moment the last vestiges of the man who loved her died. He bled out on the concrete floor of his garage next to a half-finished blueprint. In his place stood someone else. Someone colder, more patient, someone who now had a singular focus to prove just how unpredictable he could be. Part 5, an unlikely blueprint for revenge. My initial plan was simple, expose them. Send the photos and texts to Julian's wife, send them to Sarah's HR department. Burn it all down, but that felt too chaotic, too brutish. It was demolition by sledgehammer. I preferred the precision of a controlled implosion. The goal wasn't just to destroy them, it was to use their own tools, deceit, arrogance, and money, against them. My unexpected ally came from the most unlikely of places. While digging into Julian's corporate life, I stumbled upon online message boards for former employees of his company. There were recurring themes: a toxic work environment, favoritism, and several hushed-up HR complaints. One name kept appearing, Chloe M. She had posted a few years ago, a bitter, vague warning about the division's leadership. On a long shot, I found a Chloe Martins on LinkedIn who had worked there during that time. I crafted a careful, anonymous email from a throwaway account. I didn't reveal who I was. I simply said I was a researcher looking into corporate malfeasance and had seen her old posts. I asked if she would be willing to speak about her experiences under Julian Croft's leadership. She responded within an hour, I'd be happy to. We spoke on the phone the next day. Chloe was sharp, cautious, and still simmering with a rage that was years old. She told me her story. She had been a rising star in the company, a lot like Sarah. Julian had taken her under his wing. The mentorship quickly turned inappropriate, late-night texts, demands for meetings at hotel bars, unwanted advances. When she rebuffed him, her career stalled. She was passed over for promotions, her projects were sabotaged, and she was eventually pushed out, forced to sign an ironclad NDA in exchange for a meager severance. "He's a predator who disguises himself as a kingmaker," she said, her voice tight with anger. "He finds talented, ambitious women, makes them believe he's their champion, and then he makes them feel like they owe him. And the company protects him because he brings in money. Did he ever offer you a bonus?" I asked, my heart pounding, a bitter laugh. His offers were always a little more direct. "But I know for a fact he's used discretionary funds to reward his favorites. It's his signature move, untraceable, easily explained away as a performance incentive. She was my Rosetta Stone. She helped me understand the system he had built, and she was more than willing to help me burn it down. She still had contacts within the company, people who also despised Julian but were too afraid to speak up. She also had copies of emails and documents from her time there, which she had kept in violation of her NDA, hoping one day she'd have a chance to use them. My plan began to evolve. This was bigger than my marriage now. It was about dismantling a predator's power structure, and Sarah, my wife, would be the key. Part 6, the audit. With Chloe's help, a new, more elegant strategy took shape. A public explosion was too messy. A corporate takedown, however, was a thing of beauty. It was clean, efficient, and would hit Julian where he lived, his wallet and his reputation. I spent the next month living a double life that would have made Sarah proud. By day, I was Mark Reynolds, mopey, predictable architect and husband. I listened to her complain about work, I rubbed her feet after her long, treacherous days of cheating on me, and I even helped her plan the business trip to Aspen with Julian. I played my part to perfection. By night, I was a forensic investigator. Chloe connected me with another former employee, a disgruntled accountant who walked me through the company's expense reporting and bonus allocation systems. He showed me how a man like Julian could move money around, how he could disguise personal expenditures as corporate costs. The hotel rooms, the lavish dinners, the jewelry, it was all being laundered through his corporate expense account. The Aspen trip was my opening. I knew the dates and I knew the resort. While they were sipping champagne in their hot tub, I was drafting an anonymous, meticulously detailed letter. I wasn't writing it to Alina Croft or the CEO of the parent company. That was too direct, it would be traced. I was writing it to the firm's external auditors, who were scheduled to begin their annual review in 2 weeks. The letter was a masterpiece of corporate whistleblowing. It didn't mention an affair. It was written from the perspective of a concerned, low-level finance employee. It spoke of fiscal improprieties, of a pattern of abuse regarding discretionary funds and expense reports within Julian Croft's division. I cited specific dates, project codes, and expense categories. I hinted at a culture of kickbacks and unethical incentives, using the exact terminology the accountant had given me. And I attached a few key pieces of evidence from Chloe's files, nothing that identified her, but enough to corroborate the pattern of behavior. The piece de resistance was a mention of a recent, unusually large performance bonus tied to the Axiom account that seemed wildly disproportionate to standard company practice, suggesting it might be a kickback. I sent it from a public library computer 2 towns over, then I waited. The fallout was quiet at first, then seismic. The auditors, legally obligated to investigate such a specific and well-documented claim, descended on Julian's division not with a routine check, but with a fine-toothed comb. Sarah came home a week later, her face pale and drawn. "It's a nightmare at work," she said, pouring herself a massive glass of wine. "The auditors are everywhere. They're treating us like criminals. They've frozen Julian's expense account, and they're clawing through all his discretionary spending for the last 2 years. "Why?" I asked, my voice a perfect blend of surprise and concern. "They're calling it a random deep dive audit, but it feels like a witch hunt. Someone must have a vendetta against Julian." She looked at me, her eyes searching. For a terrifying second, I thought she knew. But then she just shook her head. "Julian will handle it, he always does, but he didn't because I had one more charge to place." Part 7, the hostile takeover. The climactic reveal wasn't at a family dinner or a public party. It was in our own living room, the perfect setting for the demolition of a domestic lie. The audit had been going on for 2 weeks. The pressure was mounting. Julian was on administrative leave. Sarah was a wreck, constantly on the phone with him, their conversations now fraught with panic instead of passion. The company had hired outside counsel. It was getting serious. I chose a Friday night. I told her we needed to talk. I sat her down on the sofa, the same sofa where we'd binge-watched TV shows for 20 years. Sarah, I started, my voice calm and even, the audit at your work, it wasn't random. She stared at me, her brow furrowed in confusion. What are you talking about? I slid my phone across the coffee table, the screen lit up. It was open to the secure cloud drive, gallery view, dozens of photos, her and Julian in bed, her wearing the necklace, her laughing. Her face went completely white. She looked from the phone to me, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish out of water. The arrogance, the defiance, it all evaporated, leaving behind a raw, primal fear. How, she whispered, her voice a strangled rasp. The tote bag in the closet, I said simply. You got careless. She started to cry, the pathetic, pleading sobs of someone who has been caught. Mark, I can explain. It's not what it looks like, he pressured me. Save it, I said, my voice cutting through her tears. I know everything. I know the bonus was a payment. I know the trips, the hotels, the lies. I've been listening to you lie to my face for months. I let that hang in the air. I wanted her to feel the weight of it. What are you going to do? She finally asked, her voice trembling. Are you going to send those to Alina, to HR? I already have, I lied. But that's not the real problem, is it? The real problem is the audit. The one that started because of a very detailed, very specific anonymous tip about financial malfeasance. The dawning comprehension on her face was the most satisfying thing I had ever witnessed. It was better than screaming, better than revenge. It was the quiet, devastating click of a perfectly executed plan falling into place. You, she breathed, horrified. Poor Mark, I said, throwing her own words back at her. Mopey. Predictable, less than. You and Julian thought you were running the show. You thought you were the sharks, but you were swimming in my tank all along. I laid out the final move. The auditors were digging, but they were focused on Julian. Sarah's name was connected to the bonus, but she could still play the victim, the subordinate who was pressured by a powerful boss. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. The company's lawyers are going to come to you. They are going to offer you a deal. You are going to cooperate fully. You will tell them everything Julian did. You will paint yourself as a victim of his coercive power dynamic. You will give them the messages, the timeline, everything they need to fire him for cause and protect the company from a lawsuit. In exchange, you will resign with a severance package and an NDA so tight you won't be able to say the word bonus for the rest of your life. You will lose your career, but you will stay out of jail for fraud. And you will give me every single penny of that bonus and a 70-30 split of our assets in the divorce. She stared at me, utterly broken. The queen had been checkmated. She had no moves left, and if I do, she whispered. Then this entire drive of photos and messages gets sent to the lead auditor and the general counsel tomorrow morning, I said, and we can see how they feel about a willing co-conspirator in a multi-year scheme to defraud the company. Your choice, there was no choice. It was a hostile takeover of her life, and I was holding all the shares. Part 8, the foundation of a new life. The aftermath was exactly as I had blueprinted it. Sarah, stripped of her power and arrogance, did exactly as she was told. She cooperated with the internal investigation. Julian Croft was fired for gross misconduct and financial improprieties, his golden parachute revoked, his reputation shattered. Alina, I later heard, filed for divorce within a week. Chloe and the others finally got their justice, albeit quietly. Our divorce was quick and uncontested. Sarah moved out, a shadow of the corporate titan she had pretended to be. The house felt quiet, empty, but clean. The toxic presence was gone. I sold the silver Mercedes and put the money and the entirety of the fraudulent bonus into a trust for our son, Leo. He deserved an honest head start in life, paid for by his father, not by his mother's benefactor. What if I had just confronted her that first day? The thought crosses my mind sometimes. There would have been screaming, crying, a messy, drawn-out battle. She might have even found a way to spin it to make me the villain. My calculated response wasn't just about revenge, it was about control. It was about taking back the narrative of my own life. My life now is smaller, quieter, and infinitely more real. My architecture business is thriving. The story of what I'd been through got out in quiet circles, and strangely, it brought me clients. People who valued integrity, who wanted a home built on a solid, honest foundation. I started taking on projects I was passionate about again, not just the ones that paid the bills. I reconnected with old friends, took up hiking, and found a simple joy in the tangible, in the feel of wood grain under my hands and the smell of sawdust in the air. I am not the same man I was. The betrayal carved something out of me, but it left space for something new to grow in its place. A quiet strength, a clear-eyed understanding of my own worth. I am no longer just the rock, the supportive foundation for someone else's life. I am the architect of my own, and for the first time in a very long time, the future I'm designing is entirely mine. If this story hit home, like and subscribe for more gripping tales of love and betrayal. That was a wild ride, and the catharsis at the end was everything. But I want to know your thoughts. Drop them in the comments. Would you forgive or seek revenge? What would your blueprint for justice look like? There are no wrong answers. Check out the next video popping up now for another twist-filled saga.